Welcome, everyone. A very warm welcome to NLP TV featuring Kate Benson. She is the International Director for Education of the Society of NLP. NLP stands for Neuro Linguistic Programming, in case you don't know that. And she is the expert in the world on how to apply neuro-linguistic programming in your dealings with children or kids, or how to teach them the best strategies on high schools and all the other schools as well. Sa Foster, it might even be S.A. Foster, who is also very welcome. He says, I bet this is going to be good. Well, great to have you here, and hopefully there will be lots of interaction for all the people viewing here. So without further ado, let's welcome Kate in the program. There you are. Welcome, Kate.
Hello. Nice to be here. How are you?
Reasonably well. Everything is going well, except there is a pandemic, there is inflation, and there's a war going on. Except for those three things.
It's all good. Well,
hi, Lily. Good to you that you joined in.
I said hi. It was Simon who came in. Simon. Hi, Simon. Yeah. Hi, Lily.
Yes, and Orlando's also online.
Oh, hi, Orlando.
Great to see.
May as well all come to my house next time.
Yes. So it's how you say. It's a strategy for Twitch is that you have to greet the people in hope that they will become more and more interactive. So, welcome. I'm going to ask you all kinds of interesting questions, starting with the name of everything you do is called Teaching Excellence.
Yes.
Can you explain what you mean by teaching excellence?
Okay, but teaching excellence is... It says what it says on the can. I learned NLP, thought it was quite useful, had some applications, and I had this feeling that it was like applicable to teaching and learning, which was my specialist area anyway. I was already a teacher and training teachers. And so really it's the application of good, mainly NLP, but not exclusively NLP strategies to teaching and learning. You mentioned before about children. It's not about, I don't actually work very much with children. I'm not that keen on them all the time. They're nice in small doses, I find. But actually it's about learning. And it's about learning and teaching. Almost all of us at some time in our lives teach somebody something. We're either parents or we're aunts and uncles. We coach other people. We mentor them. We run presentations, sales pitches. All of those things are actually about imparting information to another human being and teaching them to do something maybe differently. So teaching excellence has an application across the board. It's not just limited to children, certainly, and it's not just limited to teachers. In fact, most of the feedback I get is from people who are either entering teaching for the first time or are finding themselves doing something in that field as a trainer or whatever, who haven't had any grounding in educational pedagogy, and so which is a good thing, by the way, not having had grounding in educational pedagogy. So they can learn a set of skills quickly and easily to apply to help people to learn easily and to teach easily. NLP is really valuable because it's about communication. So, some of the definitions of NLP, which I like, are things like thinking on purpose. Mm-hmm. One of Richard's latest books is Thinking on Purpose. And it's actually about how you drive your own brain. So that it moves in the direction you want it to be. But also, and what today's session is about how to drive other people's brains in useful directions so that they get what they want and you also get what you want. Right. So teaching excellence is about the application of NLP to teaching and learning primarily, not about therapy, not about business coaching and those things. So it's my sort of niche area, really.
Okay, I understand it even more clearly now. Great. I'm going to come back to that topic, but you surprised me with one bit in your answer. And even though I love to host this and I love to share all your wonderful knowledge to all other people who are watching this and later rewatching it or listening to it, nevertheless, I also want to learn for myself. So you said that almost everything was NLP, but not everything. So
yes, that's right. Well, because there are good strategies out there that are not necessarily. Well, it's not that they're not NLP, but they're not identified as NLP. So, for example, one of the things that I teach on the Teaching Excellence program, which is a bit different from just the Teaching Excellence title, is something called Bloom's Taxonomy. Mm-hmm. So Bloom's Taxonomy is a hierarchy of questioning. And we'll probably talk about one of these on another, or we will talk about these on another of the sessions. So it's a hierarchy of questions to the better the question, the better the answer, the better the thinking that goes on around an answer. You ask a dumb question, you get a dumb answer, very simply. If you ask an interesting questing question, then you get interesting questing answers. And Bloom's developed this hierarchy. We then took it and said, well, how do we make this even more useful for people? Because when we academically produce something like Bloom's Taxonomy or Maslow's Hierarchy of Need or all of those other quite interesting and useful things, people tend to go, oh, that's really interesting. And then they tuck it away in a drawer as some academic thought process rather than take it out and utilize it. So with Bloom's, what we did is we took the meta model and the questions of the meta model and blended it with Bloom's so that you could ask even more smarter, intelligent, questing questions. So that's what I mean by not entirely. We utilize all the best of educational practice alongside the NLP.
Yes, because in my view, and correct me if I'm wrong, NLP is also a way to map human behavior, and any human behavior can be mapped by NLP. And so if the Bloom taxonomy is very interesting, then we can adapt it and incorporate it within NLP.
Yes, absolutely, and I guess that's what we do. But I mean, I don't want to I wouldn't like to lay claim to Bloom's taxonomy as an NLP technique or a process, but we want to honor people for the work that they've done.
Right.
But certainly in NLP, we're utilizing everything available to us, and so it makes it. Our process is NLP, doesn't it? Makes it part of NLP. The same with another example of that, which is a good example, is Cobb's learning cycle.
Right.
So Cobb's, developed a learning cycle of steps of learning. Again, probably another session we'll have in the next few weeks or so. And again, it was a very interesting process full of very long, complicated words with massive amounts of definition. And people went, oh, that's nice, interesting, put it in the drawer. Not quite sure how it applies to my 5-year-olds in the classroom, so I'll just leave it there. And then it was adapted by a lady whose name I can remember, but I bet I can't remember, but somebody's going to tell us in a minute who it is. Because it's just gone out of my head. So one of those smart students out there is going to type it in for you to say in a minute, your host, I'm sure. Somebody will be on Google. And created format, which is the NLP is an NLP application of Cobb's learning cycle. So we learn format on NLP trainers, but people don't necessarily know that it comes from Cobb's.
Right. Yeah. Excellent example. Jamie says, I love a bit of Benjamin Bloom. So you already have one fan for the Bloom taxonomy.
Fan.
So the question that I had more in line with the topic today would say that you're saying it's about teaching and learning, and it seems that you have a theory about those two. What can you say about the relationship between teaching and learning?
Oh, well, that's really easy. I have a very clear definition of that. If you're teaching something and the person you're teaching it to hasn't learnt it, you haven't taught it. It's as simple as that. The teaching and learning are two sides of the same coin. And the only measure for whether something is taught is whether or not somebody's learnt it.
Right.
And this, believe it or not, simple as that seems, is quite a radical idea, because it puts the responsibility for the learning on the teacher.
Yes, well, it's changed my way of approaching training programs. I used to think that it was all about the greater glory of me, where I could shine and demonstrate how much I know and was capable of doing. But then I found out by joining you on your Teaching Excellence, participating in the Teaching Excellence program, that it's actually about the people, the students in the room. They have actually to learn something, which was completely new
Yes,
to me.
that's shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, it's shocking. By the way, Jamie came up with the name of the lady you did not yet remember. It's Bernice McCarthy.
Yes, thank you, Jamie. I knew one of them could be relied upon for that.
Exactly. That's very good.
Fantastic. That's brilliant.
Yeah. So that's great. And then there is something. There's a request from Lily. You said something that was a great quote. Can you repeat it? It's probably out if they haven't learned that they didn't teach it or something like that. Can you repeat that one?
I don't know which quote she's talking about. Well, yeah, that's what I absolutely believe, that if you're teaching something and they haven't learnt it, you haven't taught it. It's as simple as that. And a lot of the time I go around schools, colleges, I go around training programs, NLP training programs, and people go like, well, I taught them that yesterday.
Right.
No, you didn't, because they haven't remembered it and they don't know what to do with it. And they're looking at you blankly. That means you haven't taught it. It's like saying, it's like you take your car to a garage to get it fixed. It needs new tires, right? And they put the tire on, and then they don't do the bolts up, and then they drive away and they say, well, I put the tire on.
Right.
It's the same. You finish the job off. You don't go halfway. You keep going. Tenacity is one of my big things. You keep going until they have learned it, and you find a new way to do it, and you find a different way, and you keep going around it this way and that way and that way until you get there. And a lot of people say, well, that just makes it really easy for the learners because they have to sit there and, they can just sit there going, no, they're what we call, I call them rhinos, really hearing name only. They're sitting in the room, but they're not actually.
Republicans in name only, rhinos.
Really hearing name only. But actually, that's also our responsibility. If a student isn't ready to learn, or a training, it's people often say, because one of the things we're going to talk about today is behaviour. That's actually what we're going to talk about in a minute, I hope. That's what I plan to talk about. But people say, well, it's just like children's bad behaviour. No, the worst behaviour I ever see is amongst adults in training programs. They behave completely inappropriately. And I don't know if other people have found this, but on Zoom, it's even worse. People turn their cameras off, they walk around, they play with their dog. They're doing all these things that are like not appropriate in a training program, because you're sitting on the front row of a seminar effectively when you're on Zoom. So if you're sitting there, picking your nose or, whatever you do, it's not very nice. And actually the things that people say, the rudeness and the arrogance of people are much worse amongst the adult learners, in my experience, than they are amongst children. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about today, because if they're like that, then it's our job to get them ready to be able to learn. That's also our responsibility. It's a responsibility we don't often take. We prep it, we plan it, we decide what we're going to do, and we go in, we go, they just weren't up for it today. No, if they're not up for it, it's your job. Right. It's your job to get them up for it. So so that's why it's our responsibility.
I also linked in a Trainer Excellence website so that also trainers understand that the things you teach, the training and learnings are, also for trainers.
Yeah, relevant.
Keep the comments going. I'm going to go by them all, so it's not like we're going to miss one. But this one is just too great, according to Lily. But Joost is often very inappropriate too. I have to admit that.
I've had my moments as well. So yes, we know about. Well, Joost, sometimes we have to. we have to sort of manage when Joost is a learner. We have to find ways of enabling his learning to happen. When Joost came to my house and we did an NLP magic, I seem to remember we had to get out the Pilates ball for you to sit on, because sitting still was just too difficult.
It is. But also, I think it is a way to actually test whether people are learning NLP in a way that I can be rude and they can laugh about it rather than get upset.
Absolutely.
I also posted the NLP Magic website.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Because keep all the names coming, and I'll keep posting the links. Yes, so we are going back on track because there's an interesting remark by Jeroen. Welcome, Jeroen. When I learn somebody else NLP or OBM, OBM is Organizational Behavior Management. It's might not be familiar with most NLP people, but it is. I always say organizational behavior management is NLP for companies and organizations, where you use basically the way you train dogs to make sure that all the employees are trained to be happy and loving their work and working harder, being more productive. Or something else, I learn myself the topic better, so I love teaching now.
Yeah, and they're absolutely right, and that's actually scientifically proven that the best way, and this is one of the things when I'm teaching kids to revise, and they're saying, "No, I don't get it." One of the things is sit down and teach it to somebody else, and there's evidence that says that and the evidence in terms of reading is like that. If you take a child who can read, and one who at this level, and one who can read at this level, and you get this one to teach this one comes up, but this one does too.
Right.
Now, as long as the gap isn't too big. If the gap's too big, then it's boring and it's not challenging.
Okay. So
but that's the same benefit. So you if you want to, and I don't know about you, Joost, but frankly, there are a lot of things in NLP I didn't get my head completely around until I decided to teach somebody else it.
Yes, definitely. For instance, I'm now, and the same goes with coaching, because I see coaching as one-on-one training. I'm now coaching a couple of people to lose weight, and the only one losing weight is me.
Oh, I think I better try that one. Okay, anybody want to a weight loss coach? I'm up for it now. I could do to lose a stone or so,
Exactly.
a few pounds.
Jamie says, I work in corporate L&D, and some of the behaviors I've witnessed are almost unbelievable. Yes, so
yeah, I believe that, Jamie, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think
this is where I think that organizational behavior management is really interesting, because then you can actually specify what are the wanted of the desired behaviors and the undesired behaviors, make sure that the desired behaviors get promoted and rewarded, and that the rewards for the undesired behaviors are, removed. Because I think that's often what happens. Why is there too much undesired behaviors within corporate environments? Because the undesired behavior is actually getting people rewards.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true. And I don't think that's just in the corporate setting. I think that's in lots of settings. And you have to look at the the unforeseen consequences, the unforeseen benefits.
Exactly.
I mean, very classically in the school system, what is the worst thing that happens to you if you are really, really bad behaved in school?
You get free time.
You get free time.
Yes, it happened a lot to me. It's so much fun. I have now one of the other pupils that was in my class in high school is now a student of me in my NLP program. And so now I can ask her, how did they experience me during high school? And one of the first things she said, well, sometimes you were there, sometimes you weren't. I skipped so much school.
But that's it. Yeah. So the more badly behaved you are, the more chance you get to go home and play on your PlayStation,
Exactly.
which is what you wanted to do in the first place. So you win. So you're absolutely right. It starts at school and it goes all the way through I remember talking to some senior managers as they were coming towards they're not towards the end of it, sort of in their 50s. And there was a redundancy package coming up. And there was big debates about whether or not they should take the package and whether it was going to be a good thing or not. And one of them said, well, I just don't know how you go about making sure that you get offered a package. And the other one just said, sit in every meeting and say, that won't work.
Right.
As long as you sit there and every suggestion, oh, that won't work. Or the other one that Jamie will recognise is we tried that before and it didn't work. That's the other famous one. As long as you keep persistently saying those two things, you will be offered the best redundancy package available.
Yes, my father got the redundancy package, but he was on the list of being irreplaceable, and he actually called up his friends in the board of this big Dutch bank, ABN AMRO, and said, "You have to remove me off this list immediately. I want to get out."
And did they? Did they?
Yeah, they did, and he got a golden parachute and was gone. And
oh, very nice.
Never complained again.
Good.
Hi, Jane. Good to see you.
Jane? Hello, Jane.
Jane also joined us. Very good.
Right, good.
Back to the topic at hand. We are going to talk. We're going to have a weekly talk, unless either you or I or both of us have something better to do, which hopefully will be rarely. But we're going to have a weekly talk about learning strategies. So, can you explain what is a learning strategy?
Well, they're not all going to be learning strategies, but they're all going to be strategies around effective learning, because some of them are not actually particularly learning strategies, but they're all processes or strategies that help with learning. And today's is more about making a distinction between learning and the behaviour that we've been talking about. But a learning strategy is effectively the sequence of steps that you need to go through in order to learn something. Now, that can be something practical like Tai Chi or Qigong or fixing a car or any of those things, or it could be something about actually learning about how to respond yourself, how to drive your own brain. So it could be, if you like, a meta program, a meta learning rather, not a meta program, and a meta learning in terms of that it's a skill that enables you to learn more, so your learning becomes generative. Or it can be something very specific, but it's essentially the steps you go through in a very, and we learn those very simply for the most part. Well, there's a number of different ways, but one of the most obvious ways is we find somebody who can do something really easily and well. We figure out the steps they go through inside and outside of their head to do that, and then we stick it in somebody else.
Right. Really? Or first in yourself, if you're...
Well, first in yourself, yes, first in yourself. Although there's always this myth that you have to be able to do it yourself. But I'm not a great mathematician, but I can teach people maths. And even though I always think, I'm going to get really good at this now, and I sort of do for the time that I'm teaching it, but I think I've got a sort of amnesia pattern that's running the program that discards them when I'm sort of done with them. So generally speaking, it's a good idea to put them through your own head and your own strategy first, but it isn't absolutely essential.
But I also think that mathematics might be a bit different, because that is how you say ruled by logic. Whereas you say fixing a car, that is much more of a skill. If I'm able to fix a car, and maybe even if I know everything theoretically, then my lack of practice and my lack of skills might harm me too much. Whereas in mathematics, that is even if I struggle with the logic explains itself almost.
Yeah.
And so great. So we're not going to do learning strategies per se, but we're going to do strategies around learning.
Yeah, we're going to actually. What I'm going to show you a slide. Actually, I'm going to confuse you now because it's not the first one.
I can go through the slides, no problem.
Can you just pop up at some point the slide that starts "What do you want?" because this explains really what we're talking about now. If you can find it.
If you give me.
So I'll talk while you fiddle around with that. There we are. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So I put this slide together just to sort of illustrate what we're talking about in this area. So we're talking about learning, and we're talking about the behaviour that promotes learning. Now, this is quite a sort of challenging idea, but learning, if you like, the set of states from an NLP perspective that you want primarily to engage learning are those that build commitment. Mm-hmm. because we want people to, so enthusiasm, desire, all of those things are all about building commitment. So learning requires a certain amount of commitment. Behavior requires compliance. So you don't actually need, I mean, it's great if people are committed to positive behavior, but actually compliance will do.
Right.
And we need generally speaking, we need a certain amount of compliance in somebody's behavior in order for them to commit to the learning. So, if people decide that they can arrive, let's say, let's look at this little session we're running now. Right. If people arrive 10 minutes after we finish, because they didn't comply to the time restraint, they miss the learning. It's really very simple, isn't it?
They can watch they can watch the
they can watch the rerun, fine, but
they can't participate.
But they can't participate. They can't ask questions.
Talking about participation, can I just interrupt you for 1 second? Because otherwise we are going too fast away from mathematics, and Simon still has a question about it.
Oh, sorry, Simon.
So do you have that's my fault. I should have done this earlier. So do you have a temporary good math state that you enter when you teach it, Kate, and then leave it afterwards?
I don't know, Simon. I'll have to think about that one. I usually, the state, you're quite right in the sense that for me, there's always a state that I enter, which is the one that goes, "Ooh, I've got an opportunity to teach something here." So there's always that "ooh" feeling when something happens, you think, "Ooh, this is a good chance," or whatever. So I definitely have a state. I don't know. I will think about that. It's a really good question, Simon. I might get you to do a quick coaching session on me to find that out. You can elicit the strategy that I use.
And then there's a more technical question from Jane. Are you okay with me screenshotting it?
Yes.
Good, that is easy. So back to learning and behavior. And I was a bit distracted by the questions, but I am going to have lots of questions about this sheet.
No, it's fine. It's a conversation. So we want a certain amount of compliance in order to get the commitment to learning, if that makes sense. Now, The other thing that happens is when we use NLP to promote learning through strategies or whatever other process we're using, our primary aim is to open up the thinking. So we want to open people's thinking to go, "Ooh, well, what if?" We don't want the close down, I'm done. We want the "ooh" state. So we want to open up thinking. So our questions, our statements, our communication should be about opening up the learning. Now, if we want to manage behavior, we don't want to waste a load of time having a big debate about why somebody's behaving like that. Well, I don't. I just want them to do it, Jimmy, or know the grievance procedure, as I would say, right? You just do it. And then we can get onto the interesting stuff. So in that sense, we often want to close down the thinking because we want the person to just comply so we can move on. Sit down and shut up, basically, is more or less what it comes down to. So we're about something else. We're about opening up thinking or closing down thinking. Again, with learning, we want to promote questioning. We want people to be asking, well, what if, and how about, and what if, and all of those sorts of questions, so that the learning becomes generative and connects to all the other bits of learning that they've already had and the ones they're going to have in the future. The Ofsted in the English education system have now renamed generative learning sticky learning. Apparently generative learning is just too difficult for teachers to understand.
So difficult.
So difficult. So now it's called sticky learning. Whereas if we want somebody to just sit down and shut up, we don't want a conversation with them about why we want them to sit in that particular chair and be quiet for the next 5 minutes, right? We just want them to do it.
Right.
We want them to turn up on time, be nice, sit down, whatever. So we want to discourage the questioning of what we're asking them to do.
Yes.
And similarly, when we're doing something that's promoting learning, we want them to remember that learning and associate into it.
Right.
Whereas when we are wanting them just to behave themselves, we want them to forget about what's going on because we don't want them to remember to do it again next time. And we want them to disassociate from that because we don't want them to feel bad in the long term about what they've done. So we want them to do it and leave it behind.
Right.
So we've got a different process going on, and the way we use our language can very simply make those distinctions.
Good. Now we're getting to the difficult questions. And Jeroen, but that's also because he's one of my students in organizational behavior management, is also already hinting to it. Do you include positive consequences in the matrix? And then he follows up. I ask this because positive consequences reinforce the desired behavior. And I'm going to take his comments and to.
This is your ABC model. I recognize it.
Exactly. That is not, if only it were my ABC model. I also have to, name the people who came up with it. So this is actually Skinner's model, and what the ABC. The actually ABC model is like with Bernice. So Skinner came up with the whole theory and the experiments, and then a guy called Aubrey Daniels, he simplified it to ABC, where A is antecedents, which is everything happening before the behavior, B is behavior, and C are consequences. And consequences have a much bigger impact on future behavior than antecedents. But I have a different, but I'm using Jeroen's remark to steer you towards this. So my question is more about the brain has a number of ways of learning, but there are two major ways, which is basically learning through associations, which is Pavlov or anchoring, as we call it in NLP. And there's a different association than what you call associate here, because that is more to do with how you experience it.
Yes.
And that is more of how you acquire knowledge. Whereas we also have instrumental learning, which is using the ABC model to reinforce behaviors that are rewarded and discourage behavior that is punished. So when I see this chart, my brain goes, okay, yeah, you kind of get learning and behavior away from each other. Say there's two different categories. I'm not sure whether that's black and white. But
no, it's not black and white. It's not black and white. Just the model.
Yes. So, but my brain goes, okay, but is the learning part more of learning knowledge and learning the associations in the Pavlov sense, and behavior more the instrumental learning of where we learn the desired behaviors by being positive reinforced? Is that how I can understand these two lists? I know it's a different
sort of question, really. No. I mean, if I just go back to the question, the first question. Certainly, I use desired reward for desired behaviors. I mean, it's right. as Jos knows very well. I mean, I think one of the things that sparked your thinking was the fact that I was a grown-up person giving out sweets and stickers to mature adults. Yes. Why would I do that? I do that because I build reward into the behaviors that we want. Now that can happen with learning behaviors, if you like stuff around learning, but it can also happen about behavior. So of course, every time you see somebody behaving in an appropriate way, then it's worth, in an organizational setting or in a training room or whatever, it's always worth rewarding that. So I will say, for example, when people are one of the very really simple example of this is people turning up on time. Trainers and teachers and chairs of meetings complain all the time about people's timekeeping, right? But one of the things that they rarely do is reward people when they are on time.
Exactly.
So the first thing the first thing I will always say in a meeting or a training or whatever is thank you for being here on time.
Right.
Rather than ignore all of that and then just complain and bitch and moan about the people who turn up late and pay attention to them. Because remember that we're talking about positive and negative reward, but actually behavior, attention of any description, positively or negatively, is perceived as reward.
Yes, by most people, not all people.
Most people. So if somebody walks in late, even if I stand there with steam coming out of my ears yelling at them, they'll go, oh, I'm getting attention.
Definitely, yes.
So when you say, so it's not about positive and negatives. So you need to make all the attention be on the behavior that you want, which is one of the reasons why I'm saying forget and disassociate. So once somebody has behaved inappropriately and I've put it right, I want to move on as swiftly as possible from that to the next point where I can then turn and reward them for whatever it is that they're doing that's the right thing.
Right.
So just like dog training, you go, no. And then the dog moves away and you go, good boy. So it's exactly the same process as that. So, but that's what, but in separating those two things out in terms of, you could put under learning, you could relabel this, if you like, good behavior and bad behavior.
Oh, wait a minute. That's completely enlightening me. Okay.
Well, you could, but that wasn't because we're looking at strategies for learning. I didn't actually introduce that as the model, but you could do that way. If you're looking at good behavior, you want commitment to that. You want to open up the thinking about it. You want to promote questioning about why is it a good thing to do. You want them to remember it and associate. Bad behavior, good, good toes, naughty toes. If anybody's done ballet classes, used to do that. Yes. Then you can do. Then you could see it in that way as well. But I'm just making this distinction in terms of teaching excellence because I'm saying we want to get the behaviour compliant enough to be able to teach them something in the first place.
Right. So okay, now I'm completely clear. Learning should just read desired behaviours, and behaviour should read undesired behaviours.
Well, it could have those headings. It not should, because it works perfectly well with the headings it's got, but you could have an alternative version of that.
No. If I didn't learn it, you didn't teach it.
That's true. If you want that heading, Joost, you can have that heading.
Okay, but let me rephrase it. Is there any scenario where those headings would be wrong?
These headings or the other headings?
No, my headings. So
no, not necessarily, but there's yeah. Well, I don't know. I have to think about that. Is there a scenario? Since I only just decided that we could do it that way, I'm not really sure I've explored this model in its totality yet.
No problem. We can come back to it next week or the week after. There are still a couple of remarks that I want to pass by. Simon says, I tell them what do they want? Rainbow unicorns that produce Skittles. Much later, I get out rainbow unicorn pencil cases with Skittles in as the reward.
You've been well trained, Simon. I'm so glad after these years you're still on their case. Well done. Rainbow unicorns and Skittles are fantastic.
And then Jamie says, one of my favorite books on behavior change is in fact a dog training manual. Lol. Well,
yeah, they're very good. They're really good. And my favorite TV programs are dogs behaving very badly, because you can just read, people behaving very badly. And most of the time, the dog trainers are training the humans.
Good.
So does that make sense now? Are we happy with that? Should we look at some examples of that?
Examples of what?
Of this model. Of the difference between learning and behavior. Because you asked me, the reason I put this let me just explain. The reason I put this like this is because you're talking about learning strategies. This, I don't feel, is a particular learning strategy. It's a strategy that helps you to make sure everybody is on the same page so you can move on and get to the learning.
Right.
And really, it's all about those simple words in NLP that you use and how your brain processes.
So this is very specific. How to prepare students or kids or adults for to get in the mood or in the how you say the brain state or the activity that encourage learning, and then we have desired behaviors that increase the chance that we're going to learn.
Yeah, I'm going to, because you've got a model that works for you, I'm going to change it now so it works for your learning, Joost, because it's very important to me that you do. So I'm going to say there's a set of behaviours that stop undesired behaviours in order to, then we can move on to promote desired behaviours.
Yes.
Which include learning.
Excellent. So where there's behaviour
and learning processes. Yeah. Is that better? Does that work for you? I'll change it next time we do.
There was the conspiracy was messing up the internet connection with the Isle of Wight. But I understood the following, and correct me if I'm wrong. So what is listed here as behavior is basically behavior that helps stopping undesired behavior that I say, makes it less likely that people are going to learn. And where it says learning, it is promoting desired behaviors that are going to increase the chance that people are going to learn.
Yes.
I got it. You taught it because I learned it.
Yeah. And here's your sticker.
Yeah, I got a sticker. In the meantime,
we need sticker systems on this.
welcome, Najib.
Oh, hello, Najib. Nice to see you.
And let me check to see. Okay, yes, so we are good to go. We have processed all the remarks. All the other remarks are just trying to make fun of me, so I'm going to ignore those.
So I just wanted to get into some of the really sort of minutiae of how this works, really, in terms of language. So the model's all one thing, and I think we're on the, I think we've got there on the same page of that. But just to look at some of a refresher for some, I mean, actually, most of the people here have done quite a lot of NLP, so it might be that they want to ask other questions about it, but really just a refresher, because a lot of people get into the whole thing about the meta model and the Milton model and which questions, whatever. And actually, it's quite simple, and we can teach other people to do this without them necessarily having, done weeks and weeks and weeks of NLP meta model and Milton model training, because there are just some very small things, changes people can make in their language, in their behavior, that means that life gets easier for them, because people are more compliant. Because it's the way we ask things, or the way we insist on things, or how we communicate, that determines whether or not people hear us.
Exactly.
So I just wanted to give a few examples of
before you do that.
Yeah.
We have a remark by Lily, because she has a very concrete question regarding the learning and the behavior, namely how to discourage questioning with someone like Joost. And according to Orlando, that is a masterclass material. So would you discourage questioning by someone like me?
Well, if I go back to this slide, the first question is, would I want to?
Exactly.
Because if your questions are all about your learning, then I wouldn't want to.
Good.
If your questions were disrupting a learning process, then I might want to close it down temporarily. But for me, questioning is always a really good thing. When I said discourage questioning, that isn't a generalization, Lily. It's not generally discourage questioning. It's discourage questioning about this thing that I'm asking you to do. So if I say, put your feet on the floor, and the student says to me, well, why should I do that? I don't want to have that conversation. This is assuming that the student's sorry, I missed a bit out. The student has his feet on the table, her feet on the table, and I ask them to put their feet on the floor. I then don't want to have a debate about whether that's a good thing to do. I just want them to do it, and then move on. So it would depend on it isn't about the type of person, but the type of question. So if the question is all about being able to continue an inappropriate behavior, then I want to close the questioning down. But if the question is actually about the learning, then I want to keep it running. Unless it's just, I want to close it down temporarily whilst we move on to another point, because something might explain it better. Does that make sense, Lily? I'm waiting for Lily now.
I had a little accident. I've had water damage indeed.
Right. Well, I've asked Lily whether or not it makes sense. I don't know if it does or not. But that's really, it's not about somebody like Joost. It's whether or not. Oh, right. Okay, Lily says.
Thanks. It is clear, much clearer now. Good. But let all the questions keep
coming. Let's just have a look at because this is one of these other slides. It illustrates exactly what Lily was saying. So could you put the slide up that says make every word count? Yes, please.
There we are.
There we are. So if we look at this as a sort of making every word count, most of us use way too many words. And often when we're wanting people to comply to a particular request, we overload the number of words in order to stay polite so that the message gets missed. So it's the opposite almost of using an embedded command or an embedded question. An embedded command and embedded question, you put lots around the outside of it so that the little message in the middle just sort of like gets pointed out unconsciously. Now you can do that.
Most of these are embedded commands. I'm a big fan of very simple embedded commands.
Well, I mean, I'm saying, so one of the illustrations I was thinking about was like the difference between you and I, Joost, and it's I'm British. So most of our communication starts with loads of softeners.
Yes, that's true.
Would you mind awfully, Eve? Would it be possible for you? Would it be too much trouble for you too? That's how we start talking. The Dutch, on the other hand, are much more straightforward. It may just be you are more straightforward, but certainly a lot of so it's more like, you know, the instruction, the command is just that's wrong or sit down or whatever. So there's no fluff around it.
I don't like to fluff that much.
No, I know you don't like to fluff. So both of those have got sort of problems in the communication, because if you fluff too much, then people miss the point or they've turned off. If you think about one of the really good examples of this is mothers. And most people who've been brought up by a mother or a mother substitute will recognize this, is that, you know, that you come home or mother comes home and there's this huge preamble that goes on. Why is it every time I walk through the door, there's clothes all over the place? And what am I, some sort of skivvy? You know, is this a hotel or whatever? Can you all please just put your clothes away? And actually, by the time we get to put your clothes away, everything's gone, oh, it's my mom, turn off, we've gone deaf. So, because there's too much preamble. But on the other hand, if we just come in and go, put your clothes away, then it's also often too just harsh. It's like, no.
I always say
you're not going to get what you want.
I always say people like to be commanded unconsciously, but they hate to be commanded if they actually consciously know it. I don't want to interrupt you too much, but Orlando.
No, I like being interrupted.
Very interesting question about the previous sheet. Questions in direction of useful conversation is within compliance in the model here.
I don't understand, Orlando. Questions in direction of useful I don't understand what you mean. I don't understand the question, Orlando.
Well, let's give it back to Orlando.
In the direction of useful communication is within compliance in... Is it within...
We'll give it back to Orlando. He can explain it in the chat, and then I'll come back to it.
Okay, right.
And then we go back.
I wish I hadn't done this slide. I wish I hadn't done this other slide now. I did it late last night thinking, oh, this will help. And actually, I'm now thinking, no, I think we'll ditch this slide for future.
Whatever you want. Do you want me to turn them
off? No, I want this one. No, fine. I was talking about, he was talking about the other slide. So that's what I was talking about. Is what you when you think you have a brainwave late at night, you know, you think, oh, maybe in the morning it wasn't such a good idea. So we've got those two extremes of the too much fluff and too much direction,
right.
and we set up conscious or unconscious objections to that. So if we say sit on the chair, it's a very straightforward command. And it doesn't have any fluff. So that's a good thing. But it can set up resistance because it's too straightforward. It's too direct.
People hear consciously that they're being commanded and they don't like that.
Yeah. So we can narrow it down a bit further by saying only sit on the chair.
Right.
Which is different from saying don't put your feet on the table, because that it doesn't, if we say don't put your feet on the table, which is what they're doing, then we're not telling them what the alternative is. So it's just like a freeze frame.
Right.
It might be, I don't put my feet on the table, I put my feet on the ceiling.
Yes, but also the brain doesn't process not all that well.
The brain doesn't process negatives. So it doesn't hear the don't put your feet on the table. It hears put your feet on the table.
Exactly.
So taking the negative out is a good thing. And also taking out any questions like, can you sit on the chair? Well, yes, I can, but I'm not sure whether I'm going to or not.
Exactly.
But
also because if you put the word only before the command, you create an embedded command. And in my experience, it is extremely rare for people to still consciously pick up the command while their unconscious mind just follows along and they go,
Exactly.
oh, there's a command, let's do it.
You narrow it right down there and you're giving more direction. It's the way. So you sit on the chair is a direction. Only sit on the chair is even more precise, if you like, in terms of the direction you're sending the person's brain. This is where you're sending the brain. And then, of course, it may be that the person doesn't know that's instructions for them. So it's worth getting their attention to make sure they're paying attention before you give the instructions. So Charlotte, or in this case, Joost, only sit on the chair. Or Charlotte, and you wait then till you get the, oh, that's me. And then only sit on the chair. And then
if I'm sitting on the chair, I look like this.
Okay. Joost, only stand up. So then, and then we get to the bit about the reward, which we were talking about before. So we say, Charlotte, only sit on the chair, please. Now, the downward inflection makes it a command, but the please makes it polite.
Right.
So we've got Charlotte, wait, only sit on the chair, please. And then this is a bit which is quite interesting from your ABC model, I think, because then you presuppose that they are going to comply by going, Charlotte, wait, only sit on the chair, please. Small wait, but you don't wait for the compliance. You hit with the thank you before the behavior.
Right. Then it's not the ABC model. Then it's still an antecedent. But
because
you can then...
the reason for that is you are presupposing the compliance.
Yes, no, I love presuppositions, and it is great. It is just not a consequence, but an antecedent.
No,
but it's a great antecedent.
It's not a consequence, but once the bottom hits the chair, then that might be that's then another opportunity to actually put the reward in there.
Yes, so compliments are great rewards. Most people like compliments, and if you, if in this case Charlotte, if I actually sit down after you said it, and then you say, "Fantastic, wonderful that you are going to sit like everybody else," that would indeed work as a positive consequence and reinforce this behavior.
Yes, exactly.
In the meantime, Orlando is good. I'm good. Questions indirectly answered.
Oh, okay. I wish I'd understood what it was, but never mind. As long as we've answered it. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Maybe it is a positive consequence, providing I'm somebody who is valued by that person.
Yes.
Obviously, I have to be. It has to be of some value to them. That me being happy with them is a positive consequence.
So positive consequences are only in the eye of the beholder. That's one of the major mistakes that often managers and directors, but also probably teachers and trainers make, is that they think that what they see as a reward will actually be a reward for the students or the pupils. Where in reality you actually have to check and ask, and maybe try. You can also try it out, but asking is often very good, and you can set up a whole.
It is, and also one of the really interesting is to be working with teenagers. I'm particularly fond of teenagers; they're my favourite group of people. It's often the one of the worst things you can do for a teenager is to then say, "Fantastic, I'm so pleased with you because you did that," because that's the last thing they want is some sort of approval from somebody who was outside of their subgroup.
Yes,
because if you're over 18, you will be outside that subgroup, but your appraise is just cringingly embarrassing. Right. So you have to find an alternative to that, and it may be simply not paying attention to them anymore is sufficient reward.
Yeah, ignoring them is often
because I'm
to be ignored.
So I've moved away. I've said thank you and I've moved away, and now I can relax again. The other thing about this particular process with teenagers is if you wait for the behavior before you reward or say thank you,
yes,
you create a dissonance between them losing face and complying. So you have to find a way with people and this is particularly noticeable with teenagers, but it's not exclusive to them, whereby they can comply without losing face with you. And you should always find a way for somebody to be able to do that. If the choice is to be embarrassed or to lose face in some way, or defy you, then they're more likely to defy you.
Definitely. Jane is saying, finally learning that one with my teens.
Yes. Yes, it's a good place to learn, Jane. But I've got another example as well, which as I was doing this, I was thinking about actually in terms of the whole thing about whether you're opening up or closing down questions. And it was one that our dear friend Laura Spicer used to talk about. And I thought it'd be quite nice just to remind people of this one as well. Some people might be familiar with it. She used it in a different context, but it's quite relevant to this. So can I have my questions slide up so I can explain this to folk? Oh, there we go. So I said before about you want to close down questions. You want to close down the thinking when it's about getting somebody to comply, and you want to open up the thinking when you want, behavior of a positive sort or for learning. Yeah. Now, this was one that I puzzled me for quite some time, because Laura used to talk about going to get a coffee and the difference between she used to teach in terms of inflection. So she used to tell us that she was going to the same coffee house quite regularly for a cup of coffee, and she would say, "Can I have a large cappuccino with cream and no chocolate?" Big downward inflection.
Yes.
Command. And they would go, "Yes, of course." And they'd go back, and then they'd come back, and they would give her a cappuccino with chocolate. And then she would try it again, but this time she'd be even more fussy. She'd go, "Can I have a large cappuccino with cream and no chocolate?" Right. And they would go, "Yes, right." And she'd come back and she would get chocolate on the top. And she couldn't understand why this kept happening. And she said to her daughter, Jasmine, "Well, I don't know why I can't get a coffee without chocolate on." And Jasmine said, so Jasmine asked her, and she said, because she's younger, of course, "Can I have a large cappuccino with cream and no chocolate?" And it came back with no chocolate.
Right.
The question is, well, why? Why did the waiter comply in the third instance when they hadn't complied in the first? And I think it's a good illustration of when you're actually wanting somebody to go inside their head and make a decision. So they're not on automatic, because the waiter has to then go and do quite a number of different processes to get that cup of coffee. They have to write it down. They have to go back into the coffee shop or whatever. They have to go, either they make it or they have to give somebody else the instructions. And there's a number of different processes, and then they have to gather it up and come back. So the no chocolate bit can get lost quite easily. Mm-hmm. Unless they go inside their head. So when Yasmin says, can I have a large cappuccino and cream with no chocolate? The person has to go inside their head and go, can they have one with no chocolate? Yes, they can have one with no chocolate. So they make the decision internally, and once that decision is made internally, it's much more powerful than just having it written down on a piece of paper externally that they haven't actually bought into the decision.
Right.
So I thought that was quite an interesting illustration of the whole thing about when you're opening up and closing down questions.
Can I also ask something about this, because it is one of my interesting topics, is that within NLP we often learn to do this command voice down and talk into a very low voice, because Milton Erickson talked in a very low voice. And indeed, science has shown that it is increasing the likelihood of compliance. But the very high voices and going, "Well, this is nice, and can I have chocolate?" actually create much more sympathy. So if you look, for instance, at stand-up comedy, you see that they most of the time go much more into the higher tones or the higher voices than the lower voices, and they're still to great effect. So do you feel that it has also to do with if you go, "No chocolate," then the person just thinks, "Oh, fuck it, I'm going to give them chocolate." Whereas, "No chocolate," then they go, "Oh, this is a sympathetic."
That's right. Yeah. yes, yes, that's right. So there's a sort of more of an empathic response to that higher voice, that higher octave and things. And so, yeah, I think you're right. And I do think that this whole thing with this NLP myth about you've got to lower your octaves and speak very low down on the range to have some sort of gravitas is rubbish, really. I think
it works in some cases.
It works with some people, but if you're 5 foot nothing and female like me, I'm never going to have a really gruff, growly voice. So
unless you smoke a lot of cigarettes, then you especially sound very hypnotic. I've smoked so much cigarettes. I'm a master hypnotist nowadays.
That's right. Yeah, I could do that. It is quite. But you find other ways of bringing that gravitas to your voice, and it isn't. It's more subtle, I think, than just about range and where you breathe from and stuff like this. It's about change as much as anything, and marking things out. One of the things that I learned to do was to bring humor to a situation where I want somebody to comply. So rather than to be that, no chocolate, I just bring a bit of humor to it. And so I'm using I can use a very forceful, quite school mommy voice about something, but right at the end, I'll just like raise a little giggle.
Right.
And I remember us being in Amsterdam on one of the early events that we ran together, Joost. I think it might have been the very first one. And there was an NLP trainer who shall remain nameless, who had managed to wangle a free place on the course because they brought a small group. Of a group of students, but they were not engaging. They weren't modelling what I regarded as good behaviour, good practice in supporting their group of students. So they were only interested in being there in the mornings, and they weren't interested in all the practice that we were doing in the afternoons. And they would swan off into Amsterdam to do whatever one preferred to do.
Yes. We have no idea what they were doing in Amsterdam.
Not at all. Absolutely no idea what they were doing. And this, I was quite displeased with this because I thought it wasn't appropriate, and it was rather disingenuous to their students. So on his way back in, he was sort of swanning in around coffee time. Towards the end of the day, I collared him about it, and so I said, oh, it's nice to see you. So nice to see you coming back. I really think that since you brought a group of students, it's not modelling good practice to disappear off into Amsterdam. Well, even though I'm sure it's much more fun what you've been doing than what we've been doing, and I'd like you to make sure that you stay for the rest of the seminar with your students. Is that okay? And he went and he turned and walked away, and he said to me, do you know, Kate, I never know whether you're joking or not. And I went, that's right, you don't. Yeah. And he sort of went off with this slight sort of, well, what is she going to do next type thing about it. But he did actually hang around quite a bit more after that.
Good.
So you can, you use your voice in a lot of different ways, and you use that whole humor spectrum in a range of ways. Because one of the things you were talking about, consequences, which is quite interesting, is that positive and negative consequences. One of the things that I've learned is if you don't specify negative consequences and you specify really precisely positive consequences, you get a better result than if you specify them both.
Definitely, but those are again antecedents, because you're actually using promising very specific positive rewards and threatening with unnamed negative stuff.
Yeah, because people will fill in things that are much worse. I can make a pretty good guess about what what would please somebody, but I don't know what people are particularly scared of or worried about. Or
exactly.
So they'll fill in that. If you make that unspecified, they'll fill it in with much worse things than I could even possibly think about, probably.
Exactly. Yes. time is flying when we're
Yes.
having fun. We're already past the hour. And I still have a couple of remarks. Simon says that my voice after having smoked too much to become an hypnotist really works with my scary eyes. Well, that's great to hear. And Lily is saying, interesting. I always asking for my latte extra hot, mostly sending back the coffee as it's not hot at all. Going to order next time with a question, how can they make my coffee extra hot?
Oh, well, I look forward to finding out how that goes, Lily. I hope you're very successful.
Good, good. So if people have any questions or remarks at the very end, hurry. This is your final call. This is the last chance to ask Kate questions.
We can lose that slide now, Joost. Take that slide down so we can.
Oh.
That's better. Oh, yes. That way now.
Yes, no, I'm in full control of everything that happens. Well, in my dreams, but at least I can play around here a little bit. But it doesn't seem like there are any questions. So thank you, Kate, for your wonderful exposition. And Simon says, brilliant as usual. Great to see you both. Well, that's good to hear. What's even better news is that Kate is going to do this each and every week. So next week on Tuesday at 12, how do you call it? 12 noon?
12 noon, yes.
12 noon GMT, Greenwich time in UK.
Time.
Or 1 p.m. In Central European Standard Time. We're going to have another session with Kate on a different learning strategy, or a strategy surrounding learning, I learned today. So hopefully you all tune in. If you want to tune in, go to twitch.tv/Joost van der Leij. If you have no clue how you spell it, then you have a nice quest to figure it out. And then we will be back in 1 week. Hopefully you all will be back as well. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, everybody who's been watching. Thank you for all the questions and interesting comments, except for those few remarks that made fun of me. And then we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Next week. Bye.